At 9:12 a.m. on October 27th, the wind still sounded manageable. Not kind, not gentle, just the kind of cold that makes you believe you are in control if you keep moving. The four of them left the lower basin in single file, boots crunching on frozen crust, breath hanging in pale threads that vanished as soon as they appeared. Mark Reynolds, 44, had the oldest knees in the group and the quietest voice. He was not the strongest, not the loudest, not the guy who talked about summit mindset, like the mountain was a motivational poster. He worked numbers for a living in Denver and carried responsibility like a habit. When Ryan Holt, 29, showed up with a pack that sat wrong on his shoulders and kept slipping, Mark did what he always did. He stopped, took the younger man's spare water and a heavy outer layer, adjusted the straps, and redistributed weight like it was a tax form. Ryan protested once, quietly. Mark ignored it with the calm irritation of a man who had raised children and watched people argue with reality. He cinched the straps, checked the buckles with numb fingers, and shoved the pack back into Ryan's hands as if this was not kindness, but basic maintenance. Ethan Walker, 32, the route planner, watched the exchange and said nothing. He was the kind of person who believed preparation could replace luck if you did enough of it. His phone was already out twice in the first hour, not to take photos, but to confirm their location on an offline map. He did not like surprises. Mountains specialized in them anyway. Carlos Mendez, 38, a firefighter from Colorado Springs, walked behind Ethan like a moving wall. He had the easy strength that made the others feel safer than they should. He also had the habit of checking everyone without looking like he was checking. When Mark finished helping Ryan, Carlos gave a small nod, the kind of approval that said, "Good, keep that up," without making it a speech. By 10:05, the trail tightened, and the slope started to bite. They moved onto a high traverse where the basin dropped away to the left like a missing floor. The sun was bright, the sky a hard blue, and the cold was sharp enough to make their faces ache. It looked clean, almost pretty, which was how mountains distracted people right before punishing them for trusting appearances. Mark's breathing grew louder inside his hood. Not panicked, just heavier, like the air itself had become stingy. He tried to keep his steps even, slow and economical. He kept thinking about how stupid it was that a place could look so quiet and still ask so much from the lungs. He did not say it out loud. Complaining burned energy. At 10:31, Ryan's pace stuttered. The younger man slipped once, caught himself, and laughed too loudly, like he needed to prove it was nothing. Ethan turned and gave him the look people give when they are counting minutes. Carlos didn't say anything, but his shoulders tightened. Mark wanted to tell Ethan to stop staring holes into Ryan's back. The mountain already did enough of that. They climbed higher. The trail turned into a narrow line of compacted snow, cut by old footprints and wind-sculpted ridges. Mark watched the boot marks as if they were instructions. He also watched Ryan's hands. They were losing precision, small fumbles on straps, awkward grip on poles. Mark had seen that before in different situations, people who did not realize they were reaching the edge of what their body could do. At 11:02, the first real problem hit them. A gust rolled over the ridge with no warning, not a steady wind, but a shove. The air filled with fine ice grains that stung cheeks and crawled into seams. Ethan raised his phone automatically, as if signal might appear out of stubbornness. "No bars," he said. Carlos tried his own device. Same result. Mark pulled his phone, mostly out of habit, mostly because humans love checking the door after the lock has already clicked. The screen showed the same blunt message: no service. No quick call, no convenient rescue story. Just four people and a route that suddenly felt less like an adventure and more like a negotiation with physics. They kept moving because stopping was not a neutral choice up there. Stopping was surrender in slow motion. At 11:18, they reached a rocky notch that gave them a brief shelter from the wind. Ethan crouched over the map, lips tight, finger tracing the next segment. Ryan leaned against a boulder, breathing through his mouth like he was trying to drink air. Carlos pulled an extra glove from his pack and offered it to Ryan without saying a word. Ryan's hands shook as he took it. Mark watched the exchange and felt a dull worry settle in his stomach. Carlos had gloves to spare. They all did. The problem was that warmth and time were not items you could hand someone. You could only give up your own. Ethan stood and said, "We go now. We stay on schedule." Mark looked at the ridge above them. The light was still bright, but the wind had turned mean. His phone stayed in his pocket like a useless promise. He glanced at Ryan, saw the way the younger man tried to hide how much he was struggling, and realized something simple and unpleasant. Up here, kindness did not get rewarded. It got tested. By 11:40 a.m., the mountain had lost its patience. The ridge above the notch narrowed into a hard, angled spine of snow and exposed stone. The sky stayed blue, but the wind turned steady and sharp, cutting through seams and finding skin without effort. Ethan moved first, careful and mechanical, stepping exactly where older prints suggested safety. He checked the offline map again, jaw tight. Carlos followed, solid and quiet. Ryan came next, slower than before. Mark stayed last, watching the group instead of the view. At 11:55, Ryan slipped again. This time there was no forced laugh. His right boot punched through crusted snow and hit rock underneath. He dropped hard to one knee. Carlos grabbed his pack instantly, stopping the slide before it became something worse. They stayed frozen for several seconds. No one said the word fall. "You okay?" Carlos asked. Ryan nodded too quickly. "Yeah." But his breathing was wrong. Too loud, too uneven. They moved again, but the rhythm was gone. The crunch of boots was no longer steady. There were pauses now, corrections, hesitation. At 12:15 p.m., the temperature dropped further. Not dramatically, just enough to stiffen fingers and make breath heavier. The ridge curved left, exposing them completely to the wind. Snow lifted in thin, angry streaks across the surface. Mark noticed Ryan's hands first. The grip on his poles was loose. Small adjustments took too long. When Ethan asked a simple question about footing, Ryan answered after a delay, like he was processing through fog. Carlos saw it too. "We can't slow much," Ethan said without turning. "Weather window's narrow." The phrase sounded clean, controlled, as if this were logistics. Ryan stumbled again at 12:28. He did not fall, but he swayed. Mark stepped forward and caught his arm. The weakness was real now, not dramatic, just steady and worsening. "Talk to me," Carlos said. Ryan blinked slowly. "I feel light. Like my legs aren't working right." Ethan exhaled through his nose and checked his watch again. At 12:37 p.m., they crossed 4,900 feet above the basin floor. Ethan's altimeter confirmed it. The number meant nothing by itself, but it marked distance from help, distance from easy retreat. Ethan pulled out his phone again. No signal. Carlos checked his. Same result. He raised it higher, then lowered it, irritated. Mark checked his own out of habit. Blank bars, silent screen. The device felt decorative. The wind pushed harder across the ridge. Snow grains hit exposed skin like sand. Ryan bent forward, hands on his knees. "I'm fine," he said, before anyone asked. No one believed it. Carlos crouched slightly to eye level. "You dizzy?" Ryan hesitated. "Yeah." That single word shifted the balance. Mark looked ahead. The ridge did not get wider. It narrowed. The path carved into the slope looked thinner than before. The drop to the left was clean and steep. The right side offered no real safety, only illusion. "We push another 20 minutes, Ethan said. "There's partial cover near the rock break." Mark turned his head slowly toward him. "And if he can't?" Silence. The wind filled it. Carlos stood and adjusted his pack. He was thinking fast, calculating weight, distance, daylight. The sun was still high, but the angle had changed. Afternoon light in the mountains never meant comfort. Ryan tried to straighten up fully. He lasted 5 seconds before swaying again. Mark grabbed his jacket sleeve this time, steadying him without comment. The truth was no longer subtle. Ryan was deteriorating. The mountain did not react. It did not change color. It did not roar. It simply continued being high, cold, and indifferent. Ethan looked at the ridge ahead, then at Ryan, then at his watch again. Mark understood something then. This was no longer about reaching the shelter. It was about choosing where risk would sit, on one man, or on all of them. And the wind was not waiting for them to agree. By 1:06 p.m., Ryan could no longer pretend. He tried to take another step, and his right leg failed to respond. Not dramatically. It simply did not obey. His boot slid half an inch sideways, and he dropped hard onto both knees. The sound of fabric hitting packed snow was dull. Final. Carlos reached him first. Mark was already there. Ryan's eyes were unfocused, not panicked, distant. "I'm not cold," he said. That was worse than if he had complained. Mark felt something tighten inside his chest. He had heard that sentence before in different contexts. When the body stops reporting cold, it is not winning. It is shutting down. Ethan looked at the sky, then at the ridge ahead, then back at Ryan. The wind pushed steadily across the slope, dragging thin sheets of snow with it. The exposed traverse they still had to cross looked longer now. "How far to that rock break?" Carlos asked. 25 minutes, maybe 30 at this pace," Ethan answered. "This isn't a pace," Mark said quietly. Ryan tried to stand. His legs shook violently. Carlos had to grip both straps of his pack to keep him upright. The ridge did not offer room for mistakes. To the left, the drop fell sharply into a basin that would take hours to descend safely. To the right, the slope angled down in hard crust that would not stop a slide quickly. Ethan pulled his phone again. No signal. He lifted it higher as if altitude would create service out of thin air. Nothing. Mark checked his own out of reflex. Blank screen. The device felt absurd in his hand. "We can't sit here," Ethan said. His voice was tight now, controlled, but strained. "If we lose daylight up here..." "If," Carlos cut in. Silence settled heavy between them. Ryan's breathing grew shallow. He blinked slowly, as if focusing required effort. "Go," he muttered. Mark leaned closer. "What?" "Go," Ryan repeated, clearer this time. "I'll slow you down." The wind carried the words away almost immediately, but they had already landed. Carlos looked at Mark. Ethan looked at the ridge. Mark's jaw tightened. He studied Ryan's face. Pale, lips cracked, eyes unfocused but aware enough to understand what he was saying. "You don't leave someone like this," Mark said. Ethan snapped back, sharper now. "And we don't all die here either." The sentence hung in the cold air. Carlos exhaled slowly. He was calculating again. Weight, distance, strength. If they tried to carry Ryan, the narrow ridge would force single-file movement. One slip could take 2 men with it, maybe 3. Mark knew it too. He hated that he knew it. Ryan tried to shift his weight again. His knees buckled immediately. Carlos lowered him carefully to a seated position against a small rock outcrop that broke the wind slightly. The shelter was minimal, enough to block the direct gust, not enough to create warmth. "How long until dark?" Carlos asked. 3 hours, maybe less if clouds move in, Ethan said. Mark stared at the snow blowing across the ridge. It erased footprints almost as soon as they were made. The mountain did not keep records. "We could descend left," Carlos said quietly. "That basin adds hours," Ethan replied, "and we don't know the snowpack below." Every option had a price. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, then forced them open. "Don't argue," he said. "Just decide." That was the worst part. He understood. Mark felt anger rise, not at anyone in particular, but at the simplicity of the situation. 4 adults, clear sky, a mapped route, and still here they were, cornered by wind and timing. Carlos crouched beside Ryan. "If we go ahead to get signal, we move fast. We call from higher ground. Then we come back." "How fast?" Mark asked. Carlos did not answer immediately. Ethan did. "As fast as possible." Mark looked at Ryan again. The younger man's breathing was uneven now, not hyperventilating, just thin. "We don't have service here," Ethan said. "We might higher up." "Even 1 bar." The ridge ahead rose slightly before dipping toward the rock break. Mark understood the math. If 2 of them moved ahead, lighter and faster, they might reach signal. If all 4 stayed, exposure increased. If they all tried to carry Ryan, risk multiplied. There was no clean option. Ryan swallowed. "Go," he said again, softer this time. The wind pushed harder across the ridge, as if impatient. Carlos stood slowly. Ethan adjusted his pack straps. Mark remained still for a moment longer. This was the line, and once they stepped across it, there would be no version of this day where it felt simple again. Carlos and Ethan moved first. They did not run. Running on that ridge would have been suicide. They moved fast but controlled, boots carving deliberate steps into wind-packed snow. Mark stayed with Ryan. The decision had split them cleanly. 2 ahead for signal, 2 remaining behind. Ryan leaned against the rock outcrop, eyes half open. His breath came shallow now, each inhale thin and effortful. Mark crouched beside him and forced calm into his voice. "Stay with me." Ryan nodded weakly. The wind scraped across the ridge in steady sheets. Snow grains stung exposed skin. The small rock shelter barely reduced the force. Mark checked his phone again. No signal. Minutes stretched heavy and slow. Ryan's responses became shorter. When Mark asked simple questions, name, date, where they were, the answers came delayed. Then they came incomplete. At 1:28 p.m., Ryan tried to adjust his position and nearly tipped sideways. Mark caught him before gravity could. "Look at me," Mark said firmly. Ryan blinked, but focus drifted. The mountain remained silent. Far ahead on the ridge, Carlos and Ethan were already smaller figures against the white. Mark could see them climbing toward the slight rise where Ethan believed they might catch reception. Mark made a decision. He stood, braced Ryan more upright against the rock, and took 10 careful steps upward along the ridge. Just enough to gain slight elevation. Just enough to try. He pulled out his phone again. Nothing. He climbed 3 steps more. 1 bar flickered, then vanished. He raised the phone higher, arm extended into the wind like a man offering something invisible. 1 bar returned. He dialed emergency services immediately. The line attempted connection. The wind howled against his hood. The call dropped. He redialed. 1 ring. Silence. Then connection. He spoke fast, clear, controlled. Location. Elevation. Condition. 4 men. 1 deteriorating. Wind increasing. The voice on the other end broke, distorted by weak signal, but enough information transferred. Enough coordinates, enough urgency. The line died again. Mark did not try a 3rd time. The battery had already dipped from cold exposure. He slid carefully back down to Ryan. "I reached someone," he said. Ryan's eyes barely reacted. "How long?" Ryan whispered. Mark did not answer that. He did not know. At 1:47 p.m., Carlos and Ethan returned, breathing hard. Carlos saw Ryan's face and understood immediately. "How long ago?" Carlos asked. "Few minutes," Mark replied. The wind strengthened again, this time pushing hard enough to force them to lean into it. Clouds had begun forming far to the west, thin at first, then thicker. They wrapped Ryan in spare layers. Carlos removed his own outer shell and added it. Ethan gave up his insulating mid-layer. Mark pressed a chemical heat pack into Ryan's gloves, though the fingers inside barely flexed. They waited. Time moved without mercy. At 2:19 p.m., Ryan stopped responding to direct questions. His breathing grew irregular, then slower. Carlos checked for responsiveness, voice steady but firm. "Ryan, stay with us." No answer. Mark watched the sky. He could hear something distant now. Not wind, not imagination. Rotors. Faint at first, then clearer. The helicopter appeared low over the ridgeline, cutting across the white expanse with mechanical precision. Snow erupted beneath it as it hovered. Rescue was not cinematic. It was efficient. Fast hands, direct commands, controlled urgency. Ryan was secured and lifted. Mark stood still as the aircraft turned away. The ridge fell quiet again once the sound faded. The three remaining men began their descent under escort guidance, slower now, controlled. No one spoke much. 3 days later, the official report stated that contact was lost at 4,900 feet due to lack of cellular service. Emergency services received a partial signal transmission at approximately 1:36 p.m. Ryan Holt survived. Severe hypothermia. Early-stage high-altitude cerebral complications. Recovery took months. The report did not include the silence that followed the decision on the ridge. It did not record the look on Ethan's face when he realized the margin had been thinner than he calculated. It did not document how Carlos replayed the moment Ryan said go more times than he could admit. It did not note how Mark stopped checking his phone obsessively after that day, as if signal bars were no longer symbols of control. The mountain kept its shape. The ridge remained where it was. The wind continued across it without memory. But the line they crossed that afternoon stayed with them, because losing contact at 4,900 feet was not just about signal. It was about how close 4 ordinary men came to learning how little control they truly had, and how narrow the distance is between decision and consequence in cold air. The report said they lost contact at 4,900 feet. It didn't mention the wind. It didn't mention the silence before the decision. Ryan survived, but none of them walked away unchanged. Mountains don't care. They just wait. This was the final climb.